Who stole the Book of Pyramid Secrets? There are secrets that civilizations record, and secrets they deliberately hide. And then there are secrets so dangerous, so transformative, that they vanish entirely, leaving behind only fragments, whispers, and fear. Somewhere in the ancient world, according to legend, history, and scattered texts, there existed a book that explained how the pyramids were built, why they were built, and what knowledge they were designed to preserve. A book not meant for ordinary people, a book that later generations claimed was stolen, hidden, or destroyed. It is often called the Book of Pyramid Secrets. No museum displays it, no library catalogues it, no photograph confirms it, and yet references to it refuse to disappear. Ancient writers hinted at it. Medieval scholars searched for it. Modern researchers still argue over whether it ever existed at all. And that question, who stole it and why, may be more unsettling than the idea that it still exists, because the pyramids themselves suggest something extraordinary. They are not just tombs, they are not just monuments, they are not just feats of engineering. They are precision instruments, aligned with the stars, constructed with mathematical accuracy that rivals modern technology, built using methods that still cannot be fully explained, and, according to ancient tradition, the knowledge behind them was once written down. The earliest hints come from Egyptian sources themselves, from texts carved deep inside pyramids, texts that were never meant to be seen by the living. These inscriptions, now known as the Pyramid Texts, are the oldest religious writings in human history. But even these texts appear incomplete. They reference rituals, formulas, and instructions without explaining their origins. They assume the reader already understands something fundamental, something no longer preserved. Later, Egyptian writers claimed the original knowledge had been recorded in a much older source, sometimes attributed to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Greek historians repeated these claims centuries later. They spoke of ancient books hidden in temples, guarded by priests, containing knowledge inherited from a time before recorded history. Then, abruptly, the trail goes cold. By the time classical scholars arrived in Egypt, the priests themselves claimed the original books were gone, lost, hidden, or taken. This is where the mystery begins to darken. Because civilizations do not casually lose knowledge that defines them, they protect it, unless they are forced not to. Some theories claim the book was destroyed intentionally to prevent misuse. Others suggest it was seized by foreign powers, Greeks, Romans, or later religious authorities, who feared what it contained. And then there are theories far more unsettling. The pyramids encode knowledge that does not fit neatly into human history. Their alignment with Orion's belt is not approximate, it is mathematically precise. Their placement corresponds to cardinal directions with accuracy that modern builders still struggle to match. Their internal chambers reflect acoustic, electromagnetic, and geometric properties that seem deliberate rather than symbolic. And most disturbing of all, the technology implied by their construction appears anachronistic. No ramps have ever been found, no construction tools adequate for the task exist in the archaeological record. No contemporary descriptions explain the process, which raises the question that has haunted researchers for generations. If the pyramids were built using methods now lost, and if those methods were once written down, then someone, somewhere, made sure that knowledge disappeared. Ancient legends suggest that the pyramids were not built solely by humans. Some texts describe gods who descended from the sky. Others speak of teachers who arrived during a time of chaos to restore civilization. Modern interpretations label these accounts as myth, but myths often preserve memory in symbolic form. When ancient Egyptian priests spoke of knowledge from the stars, were they being poetic or literal? This is where the story becomes uncomfortable for mainstream history. Because if the Book of Pyramid Secrets contained instructions or knowledge that did not originate with known ancient cultures, then its disappearance was not accidental. It was necessary. Necessary to protect power structures. Necessary to control historical narrative. Necessary to keep humanity within certain limits. And throughout history, whenever forbidden knowledge threatens established authority, it is always removed in the same way, by disappearance. Libraries burn, manuscripts vanish, scrolls are condemned as heretical. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria alone erased an untold number of ancient works, works that some believe included Egyptian texts far older than Greece or Rome. But even after Alexandria fell, rumors persisted. Medieval alchemists wrote of lost Egyptian books. Islamic scholars referenced ancient wisdom sealed away. European secret societies whispered of pyramidal knowledge guarded by initiates. And in the modern age, when researchers attempt to ask serious questions about the pyramid's purpose, alignment, and technology, those discussions are often dismissed, ridiculed, or sidelined. Not disproven, dismissed. Which brings us back to the question at the heart of this mystery. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets never existed, why do so many independent sources refer to it? If it existed but was meaningless, why was it never rediscovered? And if it existed and was dangerous, who took it? Who decided that humanity was not ready to understand how the pyramids were truly built, or what they were truly for? Because the pyramids still stand, silent, unyielding, precise, and they continue to suggest that something fundamental about our past has been deliberately removed. In the next part, we will go deeper into the astonishing, mathematically impossible features of the pyramids themselves and why they suggest a level of knowledge far beyond what ancient civilizations are officially credited with. To understand why the idea of a stolen book refuses to die, you have to confront the pyramids themselves, not as symbols, not as legends, but as physical objects that behave in ways stone structures simply should not. The moment you stop looking at them as tombs and start treating them as engineered systems, the mystery deepens. Begin with scale and precision. The Great Pyramid of Giza was the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. It is built from more than 2 million stone blocks, many weighing between 2 and 15 tons, with some internal stones exceeding 70 tons. Even today, moving blocks of that size requires heavy machinery, steel cables, and computer-guided cranes. Yet the pyramid was constructed with joints so tight that a razor blade cannot be inserted between many of the stones. This is not crude stacking. This is precision engineering. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an error of less than 4 arc minutes, an accuracy that modern surveyors struggle to match without satellites. It is not aligned to magnetic north, which changes over time, but to true geographic north, requiring advanced astronomical observation. The builders had to know not only where north was, but how to measure it with extreme accuracy over a large area. Now consider what that implies. To align a structure this precisely, you need long-term observation of the stars, a stable reference system, and mathematical modeling. You need to understand Earth as a rotating sphere. You need timekeeping methods accurate enough to track stellar movement. None of this appears in the simple rope and ramp explanations often offered. The dimensions of the pyramid raise even more questions. When you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by twice the height, the result closely approximates pi. This is not symbolism, it is geometry embedded in stone. The ratio appears again and again throughout the structure, suggesting intentional design rather than coincidence. The pyramid also encodes Earth measurements. Its scale corresponds to the dimensions of the planet, as if the builders were working with global data. The pyramid's latitude, 29.979245 degrees north, mirrors the speed of light when written as 299,792,458 meters per second, a numerical coincidence so precise that many researchers refuse to dismiss it casually. Either this is the most extraordinary accident in architectural history, or the builders possessed knowledge we are not accounting for. Then there is orientation to the stars. The internal shafts of the pyramid are not random air passages, they are aligned toward specific celestial targets, including the region of Orion's belt and the circumpolar stars. In ancient Egyptian belief, these stars were associated with immortality and the realm of the gods, but alignment alone does not explain the engineering required to achieve such precision from inside a sealed structure. To aim a narrow shaft through tons of stone toward a precise point in the sky, you must calculate angles in 3 dimensions while accounting for Earth's axial precession. That means the builders understood that the stars shift position over time, a phenomenon officially discovered thousands of years later. And then there is construction. No contemporary Egyptian text describes how the pyramids were built. No plans, no blueprints, no detailed records. For a civilization that documented everything from grain inventories to religious rituals, this absence is striking. The silence is not random. It suggests that the knowledge may have been restricted, preserved elsewhere, or deliberately removed. Archaeologists often propose massive ramps as the solution, but no physical evidence of such ramps has ever been found, and the mathematics of ramp construction quickly become absurd. A ramp long enough to reach the pyramid's height at a manageable angle would have required more material than the pyramid itself. And even then, moving multi-ton blocks up such a structure would have been inefficient to the point of impossibility. Other theories propose levers, counterweights, or internal ramps. Each solves one problem while creating another. None explain how blocks were cut with such precision using copper tools. None explain the lack of tool marks consistent with known techniques. None explain the uniformity across millions of stones. This is where alternative ideas emerge, not as fantasy, but as attempts to fill explanatory gaps. Some researchers suggest the builders understood sound and vibration in ways lost to us. Others propose knowledge of advanced stone softening techniques hinted at in ancient legends. And then there are theories involving non-human assistance, not as science fiction, but as interpretations of ancient descriptions. Ancient texts repeatedly describe beings who descended from the sky, taught humanity, and then left. In Egyptian tradition, these were gods. In other cultures, they were watchers, teachers, or star beings. Modern language labels these accounts as myth, but myths often preserve historical memory encoded in story. If the builders of the pyramids believed their knowledge came from divine or celestial sources, that knowledge would have been sacred and dangerous. It would not be shared freely, it would be written down selectively, guarded by priests, and transmitted only to initiates. That brings us back to the idea of a book. If such a text existed, one that explained not just how to build pyramids, but why they were aligned to the stars, why they encoded planetary data, why they were positioned where they are, then it would represent a direct challenge to conventional history. It would imply that ancient civilizations inherited knowledge rather than slowly discovering it. It would suggest contact, intervention, or a lost high civilization predating known history. And it would undermine the idea that human technological progress is linear Such a book would be dangerous not because of magic, but because of implication. And dangerous knowledge does not survive intact. Throughout history, whenever knowledge threatens power, it is controlled. When it threatens worldview, it is erased. When it threatens authority, it is labeled heretical. The pyramids survived because stone is hard to destroy. Texts are not. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed, it would not have been left lying around for later generations to stumble upon. It would have been taken, hidden, or dismantled piece by piece, its contents scattered across cultures, myths, and fragments, which may explain why the pyramids still speak, but never explain themselves. In the next part, we will trace the ancient sources that explicitly mention lost Egyptian books, including Greek historians, Islamic scholars, and medieval writers, and see how consistently they describe knowledge that no longer exists. Once you move beyond the stones and into the written record, the mystery surrounding the Book of Pyramid Secrets becomes even harder to dismiss. Because while the book itself is missing, references to lost Egyptian knowledge appear again and again across cultures that had no reason to invent the same story. The earliest non-Egyptian witnesses come from ancient Greece. Greek travelers did not see Egypt as a primitive land. They saw it as ancient beyond comprehension. To them, Egypt was already old when Greece was young, and several Greek historians explicitly stated that Egyptian priests possessed written knowledge far older than anything in the Greek world. One of the most important of these figures was Herodotus, often called the father of history. When he visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, he recorded what Egyptian priests told him, that their civilization extended back tens of thousands of years, and that their knowledge had been recorded in sacred writings kept within temples. Herodotus admitted he was not allowed to see many of these texts. That detail matters. He was not told they did not exist. He was told they were restricted. Later, Greek writers went further. Diodorus Siculus wrote that Egyptian priests claimed their ancestors possessed advanced astronomical and scientific knowledge inherited from divine beings. He described ancient records that detailed cosmic cycles, planetary movements, and the construction of monumental architecture, records already considered ancient by his time. Then there is Manetho, an Egyptian priest writing in Greek during the 3rd century BCE. Manetho compiled a history of Egypt using temple archives that no longer exist. His writings describe dynasties stretching back into mythological time, ruled not by humans, but by gods and demigods. According to Manetho, the earliest rulers of Egypt were not men at all. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, this claim reinforces a pattern. Egyptian history was believed to extend far beyond what later generations could verify, and that belief was based on written records that subsequently vanished. By the time Rome dominated Egypt, the story changed again. Roman writers repeatedly complained that Egyptian priests had become evasive. They spoke of lost texts, hidden knowledge, and destroyed archives. Some blamed invasions, others blamed religious suppression. But none denied that something had been lost. Then came the greatest knowledge catastrophe in ancient history, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. The library was not just a collection of Greek philosophy. It was an attempt to gather all known human knowledge, including Egyptian temple texts. Scholars have long debated what exactly was housed there, but ancient accounts describe astronomical records, engineering treatises, and ancient histories copied from far older sources. If a book of pyramid secrets ever existed, Alexandria would have been the most likely place for a copy to end up. And then Alexandria burned. Not once, but repeatedly, through wars, religious conflict, and political upheaval. Each destruction erased irreplaceable works. What survived was what happened to be copied elsewhere. What was not copied vanished forever, but the trail does not end in antiquity. During the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translating ancient texts from Greek and Egyptian sources again encountered references to lost knowledge. Medieval Islamic historians wrote about Egyptian sages who possessed sciences unknown to later generations. Some described texts that had been deliberately sealed or hidden inside monuments to protect them from catastrophe. One recurring figure appears in these writings, Thoth, identified by Greeks as Hermes Trismegistus. Thoth was said to be the author of secret books containing knowledge of the cosmos, geometry, and creation itself. Some traditions claimed these books were hidden inside the Great Pyramid before a great flood. This idea appears in medieval Arabic texts that describe the pyramids not as tombs, but as repositories of knowledge built to survive a global disaster. That detail is crucial. If the pyramids were designed as preservation devices, not just monuments, then the idea of a written manual explaining their purpose becomes not only plausible, but necessary. Builders do not create knowledge vaults without documenting what they contain, which brings us to a disturbing consistency. Across Greek, Roman, Islamic, and medieval European sources, we see the same claims repeated. Egypt once possessed written knowledge far older than recorded history. That knowledge included astronomy, mathematics, and monumental engineering. Much of it was lost, destroyed, or hidden, and what survived existed only in fragments and echoes. No single source proves the existence of the Book of Pyramid Secrets, but together they form a pattern too persistent to ignore. Civilizations separated by centuries and cultures all describe missing Egyptian texts, not imaginary ones, but specific works tied to the pyramids, the stars, and the origins of civilization itself. And missing texts do not disappear on their own. They are destroyed by accident or removed by intent. In the next part, we will confront the most controversial question of all: whether the knowledge behind the pyramids could have originated outside known human civilization, and why the idea of alien or non-human involvement refuses to disappear, not in modern imagination, but in ancient testimony itself. At some point, any honest investigation into the pyramids reaches a boundary where conventional explanations stop answering the most important questions. This is the point where mainstream archaeology grows cautious, where academics change tone, where phrases like symbolic, ritual, or religious belief begin to replace direct explanation. And it is exactly at this boundary that the idea of non-human involvement enters the conversation, not as science fiction, but as a response to unresolved evidence. The connection between the pyramids and beings from the sky is not a modern invention. It does not originate in 20th century UFO culture. It appears in the oldest layers of human storytelling, recorded long before the concept of aliens existed. In ancient Egypt, the builders of civilization did not describe their teachers as kings or inventors. They described them as gods. These gods descended from the heavens, brought knowledge, established order, and then withdrew. The most important of these figures was Thoth, the bringer of writing, mathematics, astronomy, and sacred geometry. Thoth was not merely a deity of worship. He was described as a civilizer. The question historians often avoid is this: why did ancient cultures consistently attribute advanced knowledge to non-human sources? Egypt was not alone. In Sumer, knowledge came from the Anunnaki. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrived from the sky. In India, the Devas descended in flying vehicles. In every case, the pattern is identical. Civilization does not emerge gradually in myth. It is delivered, Skeptics argue these stories are symbolic, but symbolism still has origin. People do not imagine gods teaching geometry unless geometry appears suddenly enough to feel external. They do not imagine sky beings giving astronomy unless astronomy arrives as a complete system rather than a slow discovery. This is precisely what troubles researchers studying the Great Pyramid. The pyramid does not represent experimental architecture. It appears fully optimized from the beginning. There are no crude prototypes, no gradual improvement. The first true pyramid at Giza is also the most precise structure ever built in the ancient world. Later pyramids are smaller, less accurate, and technically inferior. This reversal violates the expected pattern of human engineering. Normally, civilizations improve with time. Mistakes are corrected, methods evolve. At Giza, the opposite occurs. The peak comes first. This suggests one of two possibilities. Either an unknown human civilization possessed advanced knowledge before dynastic Egypt, and that knowledge was inherited but not fully understood, or the knowledge came from a source outside the civilization entirely. Ancient texts support both interpretations. Egyptian king lists, preserved by later historians, describe an era before human pharaohs, a time when gods ruled directly. These reigns lasted thousands of years. Modern scholars dismiss these accounts as mythological exaggeration, but the consistency is difficult to ignore. Why fabricate such detailed chronologies if they serve no political or religious purpose? Then there is the Orion correlation. The three main pyramids align with the three stars of Orion's belt with remarkable accuracy. Orion was not chosen randomly. In Egyptian belief, Orion represented the realm of Osiris, the god of resurrection and eternal life. The pyramids were not merely aligned with stars, they were positioned as if to mirror the heavens on earth. This idea, as above, so below, appears across ancient cultures. But at Giza, it is implemented architecturally on a planetary scale. The precision required to map stellar positions onto terrestrial geography requires advanced astronomical modeling. It requires long-term sky observation and mathematical abstraction. It requires understanding precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts star positions over thousands of years. Precession should not have been observable within a single human lifetime, yet the pyramids appear to encode it, which leads to a deeply unsettling implication. Either the builders possessed knowledge accumulated over thousands of years before Egypt officially existed, or they inherited that knowledge from a source that did not experience time the way humans do. This is where the idea of alien involvement stops being sensational and starts being analytical. Non-human does not necessarily mean extraterrestrial spacecraft and laser tools. It means the possibility that ancient humans interacted with a technologically or intellectually superior intelligence, whether that intelligence was biological, artificial, terrestrial, or cosmic. Ancient cultures did not describe these beings as invaders, they described them as teachers. And teachers leave manuals. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed, it may not have been a mystical grimoire. It may have been a technical document, a translation of knowledge that humans were never meant to develop independently. That would explain why later civilizations found it dangerous. Such a book would not just rewrite Egyptian history, it would rewrite human history. It would challenge the idea that civilization arose independently in multiple places. It would suggest guidance, intervention, or inheritance from a lost epoch. And that kind of knowledge does not simply vanish, it is suppressed. Consider what happened to other dangerous knowledge throughout history. Heliocentrism was ridiculed, atomic physics was classified, genetic research is regulated. Whenever understanding threatens worldview or power structures, access is restricted. If ancient elites believed the pyramid knowledge destabilized religious authority, political legitimacy, or human exceptionalism, removing the source would have been an act of preservation, not destruction. And removal leaves traces. The pyramids remain, but explanations do not. The effects persist, but causes are obscured. The structures endure, but instructions are missing. Which brings us back to the title of this mystery. Who stole the Book of Pyramid Secrets? Was it destroyed by religious reformers who feared its implications? Was it seized by foreign conquerors who removed it from Egypt? Was it hidden deliberately, sealed away to be rediscovered only when humanity reached a certain level of understanding? Or was it never stolen at all, but taken back by those who originally gave it? In the next part, we will examine specific historical moments where Egyptian knowledge was systematically suppressed or removed, including religious shifts, imperial conquest, and censorship, and identify the most likely suspects in the disappearance of the book. At some point, speculation gives way to motive. Knowledge does not vanish without pressure. It disappears when someone benefits from its absence. And when we trace the historical moments where Egyptian knowledge was most aggressively disrupted, a pattern emerges that is impossible to ignore. The first major rupture came not with fire, but with theology. Ancient Egyptian civilization was not just political, it was cosmological. Its power structure rested on the idea that pharaohs ruled by divine order, an order rooted in cosmic balance, mathematics, and celestial cycles. The pyramids were physical expressions of that worldview. Any text explaining their true purpose would not have been neutral information. It would have defined who had access to cosmic authority. When new belief systems entered Egypt, that authority became a threat. By the late Roman period, Egypt was no longer governed by its own priesthood. It was ruled by outsiders who viewed Egyptian religion as dangerous, heretical, or demonic. The rise of Christianity fundamentally altered how ancient knowledge was treated. Pagan temples were closed, rituals were banned, sacred texts were seized or destroyed. This was not accidental destruction, it was systematic. Early Christian leaders openly described Egyptian wisdom as sorcery. Texts associated with Thoth, Hermes, or star knowledge were condemned as forbidden. Anything that suggested divine power outside the Christian framework was intolerable. Knowledge that implied humanity, once received guidance from non-biblical sources, was especially dangerous, and this is where silence becomes revealing. If a book of pyramid secrets existed, one that explained the pyramids as cosmic devices, repositories of knowledge, or interfaces with celestial forces, it would have directly contradicted emerging religious doctrine. It would have suggested that truth came from sources other than Scripture. That alone would have been reason enough to erase it. Then came conquest. When Rome absorbed Egypt, it did not simply inherit monuments, it inherited influence. Egyptian knowledge was respected but tightly controlled. Roman elites selectively absorbed what they found useful, mathematics, medicine, architecture, while suppressing what they found destabilizing. Rome feared mystery cults. It feared secret initiations. It feared ideas that could not be regulated. Texts that explained pyramid knowledge in technical or cosmic terms would not have been shared publicly. They would have been confiscated, translated selectively, or locked away in restricted archives. And archives are fragile things. The repeated destruction of Alexandria was not a single event, but a slow hemorrhage of information. Every time the city burned, something irreplaceable vanished. Each loss narrowed the surviving record. Each narrowing increased the mythic status of what was gone. By the time Islamic scholars arrived in Egypt centuries later, they encountered ruins, not libraries. They recorded what they could from surviving fragments and oral traditions. Their writings speak of books that once existed, books sealed in stone, books hidden in chambers, books lost to time. But even these accounts fade. Then something else happened, something quieter, but just as decisive. The pyramids themselves were closed. Access to internal chambers was restricted. Knowledge of passages disappeared. Entire sections were forgotten until rediscovered by chance centuries later. If documents were ever stored within the pyramids, their removal could have occurred long before modern archaeology existed, and removal does not require destruction. A text can be taken and never seen again, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if the Book of Pyramid Secrets was not destroyed at all? What if it was taken, deliberately removed from circulation, and stored somewhere inaccessible to the public? Secret societies emerge in history precisely where forbidden knowledge accumulates. Medieval orders, alchemical traditions, and esoteric schools all claimed inheritance from ancient Egypt. They spoke of geometry as sacred, of knowledge passed only through initiation, of truths too powerful for the unprepared. These claims are often dismissed as fantasy, but fantasies usually exaggerate something real. If fragments of pyramid knowledge survived privately, then the book may have been dismantled rather than erased, its contents distributed across traditions, symbols, and coded teachings, its existence denied, while its influence continued quietly. That would explain something puzzling. Why do so many cultures independently associate Egypt with forbidden wisdom? Why does geometry appear as sacred knowledge across centuries? Why does the pyramid shape itself recur globally, as if echoing an original template? Knowledge does not replicate itself without a source. Someone had it first, and someone decided others should not. The disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets does not look like accident, it looks like containment, a narrowing of access, a deliberate pruning of narrative. Because if humanity once knew how to build monuments aligned with stars, encoding planetary data, using principles we still do not fully understand, then the story of gradual progress collapses. It suggests interruption. It suggests inheritance. It suggests that history is not a ladder, but a cycle with missing chapters. And missing chapters are always removed by someone. The question is not whether the book existed. The question is whether its removal was meant to protect humanity or control it. And that question leads directly to the most dangerous implication of all. Because if the pyramids were built using knowledge not native to their time, and if that knowledge was recorded and later suppressed, then the disappearance of the book was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of silence. Silence enforced not by ignorance, but by choice. Silence, once imposed, has a way of shaping history more effectively than any written law. After the removal or suppression of Egyptian knowledge, the narrative that survived was not neutral. It was curated. What later generations learned about the pyramids was not what the builders intended to teach, but what conquerors, priests, and scholars permitted to remain. This is why the pyramids became tombs in the historical record, not because they were proven to be tombs, but because calling them tombs made them safe. A tomb is inert. A tomb is symbolic. A tomb does not threaten authority. Yet the Great Pyramid contains no mummy, no burial inscription, no funerary imagery, no definitive evidence that any pharaoh was ever buried inside it. This absence has troubled Egyptologists for decades, but the tomb narrative persists because it closes questions instead of opening them. If the pyramids were simply burial monuments, there would be no need for missing books. But if they were something else, something functional, then the loss of explanatory texts becomes alarming. Across ancient cultures, advanced knowledge is often described as too powerful for the uninitiated, not because it is magical, but because it changes how people understand reality. Geometry alters how space is perceived. Astronomy alters how time is understood. Knowledge of cycles undermines the illusion of permanence. Egyptian civilization revolved around cycles: celestial, terrestrial, spiritual. The pyramids were expressions of that worldview, not memorials to death, but mechanisms of continuity. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets explained how these cycles worked, how the pyramids interacted with earth, sky, and consciousness, then its disappearance served a specific purpose: to sever humanity's connection to an older framework of understanding. This explains another mystery. Why was Egyptian knowledge treated differently from Greek philosophy? Greek works were preserved, debated, translated, and taught openly. Egyptian knowledge was labeled occult, mysterious, and dangerous. Even when Greek thinkers borrowed from Egypt, they often stripped the material of its original context. Plato spoke of Egyptian wisdom with reverence, yet his works survive, while the Egyptian sources he admired do not. That imbalance is not coincidence. Greek philosophy could be integrated into new religious and political systems. Egyptian cosmology could not. It was too holistic, too interconnected, too incompatible with hierarchical control. Egypt did not separate science, religion, and architecture. They were one system. To understand one was to understand all. That kind of integrated knowledge is difficult to regulate, so it was broken apart. Astronomy became myth, geometry became abstraction, architecture became symbolism, and the manual that tied them together vanished. Another clue lies in the way later civilizations approached the pyramids. They did not attempt to replicate them, not because they lacked skill, but because they lacked authorization. Knowledge is not only technical, it is cultural permission. Once the narrative shifted from "this is how we build" to "this is how ancestors built," replication stopped. The pyramids became untouchable, sacred but unusable. That transition only makes sense if the original knowledge was no longer accessible. You cannot continue a tradition without its core principles. You can only revere what you no longer understand. The loss of the Book of Pyramid Secrets transformed living knowledge into relic, and relics are safe. They inspire awe without empowering imitation. There is also a psychological dimension to this silence. Human civilizations often suppress knowledge that destabilizes identity. If the pyramids were built using knowledge inherited from a lost civilization or guided by non-human intelligence, then the narrative of human self-made progress collapses. That collapse would not merely challenge historians, it would challenge theology, politics, and human exceptionalism itself. Such implications are not tolerated easily. Throughout history, inconvenient truths are not debated openly. They are reframed, marginalized, or buried. The pyramids were reframed as primitive achievements of brute force rather than precision. The builders were depicted as laborers rather than engineers. The knowledge was reduced to ritual rather than function. This reframing worked. For centuries, the question, "How were the pyramids built?" was considered answered, even though the answers were inconsistent, speculative, and unsupported by evidence. Once an explanation is socially accepted, further inquiry becomes unnecessary. That is how silence persists. But silence leaves gaps, and gaps attract curiosity. Modern technology has begun to reopen those gaps. Scans of the pyramids reveal unknown chambers. Acoustic experiments reveal unusual resonances. Electromagnetic studies suggest anomalies. Each discovery hints at intentional design beyond burial. And every time evidence challenges the tomb narrative, resistance appears, not because the data is flawed, but because the implication is uncomfortable. If the pyramids were machines, symbolic, energetic, or informational, then the book explaining them was not merely historical. It was operational, and operational knowledge demands responsibility. Removing that knowledge may have been seen as an act of guardianship rather than theft, a decision made by those who believed humanity was not ready, or no longer worthy, of what it once possessed. That interpretation casts the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets in a different light, not as a crime of destruction, but as an act of containment. And containment suggests the possibility of return, because knowledge that is destroyed is gone forever. Knowledge that is hidden is waiting. The pyramids still stand exactly where they were placed, still aligned, still precise, still silent. And silence, when maintained for thousands of years, is rarely accidental. Once the silence settled in, it did something subtle but profound. It didn't just erase explanations. It reshaped curiosity itself. Questions that once would have been natural became controversial. Ideas that once guided construction became taboo. And over time, the absence of answers was mistaken for answers themselves. This is how the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets hardened into tradition. Centuries passed, and each new generation inherited a version of Egypt already filtered through layers of interpretation. Greek scholars romanticized it, Roman administrators cataloged it, religious authorities neutralized it, medieval travelers mythologized it. By the modern era, Egypt had become a puzzle with its sharpest edges dulled, but certain details refused to soften. One of them was intentional silence from ancient Egyptian sources themselves. The builders of the pyramids were not verbose about their greatest achievement. They documented rituals, offerings, royal genealogies, and cosmology in obsessive detail. Yet when it came to construction methods, purpose, or technical explanation, the record is nearly empty. That absence is not consistent with cultural pride. Civilizations boast about achievements they understand. They remain quiet about those they inherited. This suggests the pyramid builders may not have been the originators of the knowledge they used. They may have been custodians, following instructions passed down from an earlier source. And custodians preserve results, not explanations. This idea aligns with a recurring pattern across ancient cultures, the concept of a golden age that precedes recorded history, followed by decline. Egypt itself spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, an era when gods walked among humans and established order. Everything afterward was maintenance. If the pyramids were products of Zep Tepi knowledge, then the Book of Pyramid Secrets would not have been a human invention. It would have been a translation, an interface between two levels of understanding. And interfaces are fragile. Once the original teachers disappeared, whether through catastrophe, withdrawal, or extinction, the written record would have been the only remaining bridge. Lose the bridge, and the knowledge becomes ritualized memory rather than functional science. This helps explain why later Egyptians could maintain the pyramids but not replicate them, why they revered geometry but did not extend it, why they aligned monuments symbolically but not mechanically. They remembered what was sacred but not why it worked. As centuries passed, even that memory thinned. Foreign rulers saw Egypt as a land of symbols, not systems. They extracted resources, repurposed stone, and stripped temples of authority. What remained was architecture without instruction, a machine without a manual. And machines without manuals invite myth. By the time modern archaeology emerged, the pyramids had been redefined as funerary monuments, not because evidence demanded it, but because it was the safest explanation available. A tomb does not require advanced physics. A tomb does not suggest forbidden inheritance. A tomb fits neatly into a narrative of primitive religiosity. But the pyramids resist that reduction. Their internal layout does not resemble any other tomb. Their chambers are positioned in ways that defy ritual necessity. Their shafts serve no funerary purpose. Their geometry exceeds symbolic need. They are overbuilt for death and underexplained for life. This mismatch is precisely where the Book of Pyramid Secrets would have belonged, explaining not just how, but why the pyramids were designed this way. Without it, interpretation collapses into speculation, and speculation, over time, becomes ridicule. Ideas that challenge the official narrative are dismissed as fringe not because they lack questions, but because they ask the wrong ones. They threaten consensus. They reopen silence, which leads to a final, uncomfortable observation. The disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets mirrors a broader pattern in human history. Whenever knowledge transcends its time, it is either mythologized or erased. Leonardo's notebooks were scattered. Tesla's papers were seized. Ancient medical knowledge vanished during religious purges. The pyramid knowledge may simply be the oldest example of this pattern, and the motive is always the same: control. Control over narrative, control over belief, control over the boundaries of possibility. If humanity once possessed knowledge capable of reshaping its relationship with the planet, the stars, and itself, knowledge embedded in stone, encoded in geometry, and recorded in a now missing book, then the theft of that book was not an act of ignorance, it was an act of governance. And governance leaves fingerprints. They appear as gaps in the record, as inconsistencies in explanation, as monuments that outlast the stories told about them. The pyramids still function as they were designed to function, whatever that function may be. They still interact with light, sound, gravity, and sky in ways we are only beginning to measure. They still provoke questions that refuse to stay buried, and perhaps that is the final irony. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may be gone, but its contents were never confined to paper. They were written into the earth itself, into latitude and longitude, into angles and ratios, into alignments that cannot be accidental. If someone stole the book, they failed to steal the message, because the pyramids remain, waiting, not for belief, but for understanding. Waiting is exactly what the pyramids seem to do best. They do not decay in meaning the way stories do. They do not soften with retelling. They remain fixed, precise, and indifferent to the narratives projected onto them. And that is why, even without the Book of Pyramid Secrets, they continue to provoke a specific kind of unease, the sense that we are standing in front of something unfinished. Modern technology has begun to strip away the comfort of old explanations. When scientists introduced muon tomography to scan the Great Pyramid, they expected to confirm known chambers and voids. Instead, they discovered large, unexplained spaces deep within the structure, cavities with no obvious funerary purpose positioned in ways that suggest intentional design rather than structural necessity. These are not cracks or settling gaps. They are volumes, empty but deliberate, and emptiness in ancient architecture is rarely accidental. At the same time, acoustic researchers began noticing something else. Certain chambers resonate at specific frequencies. Sound behaves unusually within the pyramid. Low-frequency vibrations amplify. Voices carry farther than expected. Even silence feels dense, as if the structure itself is tuned. Stone does not do this by accident. The king's chamber, in particular, behaves like a resonant box. Granite, a material rich in quartz, lines its walls. Quartz is piezoelectric. Under pressure or vibration, it generates electrical charge. This property is used today in electronics, oscillators, and timekeeping devices. Ancient builders chose this material deliberately, hauling it hundreds of miles from Aswan. Why? Not for decoration, not for symbolism, for function. And function implies knowledge, knowledge that is not explained anywhere. The more these properties are studied, the harder it becomes to dismiss the pyramids as static monuments. They behave like systems. They respond to energy. They interact with their environment. They appear designed to do something, even if we no longer know what. This is where the absence of the Book of Pyramid Secrets becomes most conspicuous, because when modern engineers encounter complex systems without documentation, they do not assume simplicity. They assume missing information. Manuals are lost. Blueprints are gone. The machine remains. That is exactly the situation we are in now. The pyramids are machines without manuals, and history is full of moments where missing documentation was not accidental. During times of transition, powerful groups decide what knowledge moves forward and what does not. Texts are filtered, archives are curated, some ideas are preserved. Others are allowed to die quietly. This process is rarely framed as theft. It is framed as order. In Egypt, that order shifted repeatedly, from priesthood to empire, from empire to religion, from religion to academia. Each transition redefined what counted as legitimate knowledge. Each transition narrowed the field of acceptable interpretation. By the time modern Egyptology emerged, the boundaries were already set. Questions about spiritual symbolism were allowed. Questions about labor organization were allowed. Questions about measurement were allowed, up to a point. But questions about lost knowledge, non-human inheritance, or suppressed texts were marked as speculative before they were examined. Not disproven, just excluded. This exclusion is subtle, but powerful. It does not erase evidence. It reframes it. When anomalies appear, they are isolated. When patterns emerge, they are dismissed as coincidence. When ancient testimony contradicts modern models, it is labeled metaphor. This is how silence is maintained without censorship. And yet, silence is breaking. Not because a book has been found, but because the pyramids themselves are beginning to speak again through data. Measurements do not care about narrative. Ratios do not conform to ideology. Alignments do not bend to consensus. Every scan, every survey, every unexpected resonance reopens the same question from a new angle. If the pyramids were meant to be understood as tombs, they are wildly inefficient. If they were meant to be understood as monuments, they are obsessively precise. If they were meant to be understood as symbolic, they are excessively functional. Which leaves only one remaining category. They were built with purpose, purpose that was once explained, purpose that was once written down, purpose that is now missing, and missing purpose always points back to missing knowledge. At some point, someone decided that humanity no longer needed, or could not handle, the explanation. Whether that decision was made by priests guarding tradition, conquerors consolidating power, or inheritors overwhelmed by what they did not fully understand, no longer matters. The result is the same. A civilization that once aligned stone with stars, left behind instructions too dangerous, too destabilizing, or too transformative to survive intact. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets was stolen, its theft succeeded only partially, because books can be burned, but systems endure. The pyramids still mark time, they still encode ratios, they still reflect the sky. They are not relics of ignorance. They are reminders of interruption, and interruption suggests continuity was possible, until it was stopped. The deeper the silence runs, the more intentional it feels, which raises the most unsettling possibility of all. What if the Book of Pyramid Secrets was never meant to survive? What if its disappearance was not a loss, but a safeguard? Not to protect power, but to protect humanity from knowledge it was not yet prepared to wield. Because some technologies do not fail gracefully, some truths do not arrive gently, and some secrets, once understood, cannot be forgotten. The pyramids have waited for thousands of years. Perhaps they are still waiting, not for discovery, but for readiness. Readiness is a concept that ancient civilizations took far more seriously than we do. Knowledge was not assumed to be neutral. It was considered active, transformative, and potentially destructive. This belief runs through Egyptian religion, philosophy, and architecture like a fault line, and it may explain why the most important explanations were never meant to survive intact. In ancient Egypt, knowledge was tiered. There were teachings for the public, teachings for initiates, and teachings reserved for those who had undergone years of preparation. Geometry was not just mathematics, it was sacred structure. Astronomy was not just observation, it was alignment with cosmic order. Writing itself was considered a divine act, not a casual tool. This hierarchy of knowledge implies a dangerous idea that understanding without context could do harm. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed, it would not have been a storybook or a philosophical treatise. It would have been instructional, operational, a synthesis of geometry, astronomy, earth science, and metaphysics, a guide not just to building monuments, but to manipulating fundamental forces of reality. Such a book would not age well in the hands of unprepared readers. This is where the pyramids differ radically from later monumental architecture. Medieval cathedrals inspire awe, but they do not encode planetary data. Roman aqueducts demonstrate engineering skill, but they do not mirror celestial patterns. The pyramids do both simultaneously. They operate on symbolic, functional, and cosmic levels at once. That level of integration suggests the builders were not experimenting. They were executing a mature system of knowledge, and mature systems are not improvised. They are inherited. This realization reframes the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets not as a mystery of theft, but as a deliberate severing of a lineage. When the lineage ended, whether through catastrophe, withdrawal, or internal collapse, the custodians were left with a choice: preserve fragments and risk misuse, or allow the system to dissolve. History suggests they chose dissolution. The pyramids were left standing because they could not be dismantled easily. Their knowledge was encoded in stone because stone outlasts memory. But the explanations, the step-by-step logic that made the system intelligible, were allowed to fade. This pattern repeats elsewhere. Ancient India spoke of lost sciences after great cycles ended. Mesoamerican civilizations described prior ages destroyed by catastrophe. Sumerian texts referenced knowledge from before the flood. In each case, survivors retained rituals but lost instructions. Ritual preserves form without function. Symbol preserves meaning without mechanism. This may have been intentional. A society that survives collapse must simplify. Complexity becomes dangerous when resources vanish. The knowledge that builds empires can also accelerate destruction. Removing advanced instructions may have been an act of restraint rather than ignorance. But restraint has consequences. Once the explanations were gone, later generations inherited only the results. They saw the pyramids but could not replicate them. They revered geometry but did not apply it at scale. They aligned temples symbolically but not mathematically. Over time, reverence replaced understanding, and reverence is easy to control. This is where power enters the story again, not as villain, but as structure. Institutions thrive on stability. Radical knowledge destabilizes. Anything that implies humanity, once possessed abilities beyond current understanding, threatens authority. It is far safer to teach that the past was primitive. The tomb narrative served that purpose perfectly. It framed the pyramids as expressions of religious obsession rather than technological mastery. It transformed engineers into laborers. It reduced cosmic alignment to superstition. Once that narrative solidified, the missing book no longer mattered, or so it seemed. But silence has a cost. Without the Book of Pyramid Secrets, humanity lost not just instructions, but orientation. The pyramids were designed to situate humans within a cosmic framework, aligning Earth with sky, time with eternity, matter with pattern. That framework was replaced with fragmented systems, religion separate from science, architecture separate from astronomy, mathematics divorced from meaning. Knowledge became specialized, power became centralized, meaning became abstract. The pyramids, meanwhile, remained whole. They continued to embody a unified world view that no longer existed anywhere else. And as long as they stood, they contradicted the story being told about the past. That contradiction is why interest in the pyramids never faded. It resurfaces in every era where humanity begins to question its own narrative. During the Renaissance, during the Enlightenment, during the Space Age, during the Digital Revolution, each time the same unease returns. If ancient people were capable of this, what else did they know? And why don't we? The missing book becomes a symbol of that unease. It represents not just lost pages, but lost confidence in linear progress. It suggests that knowledge can be gained, lost, and hidden, not by accident, but by decision, and decisions imply agency. Someone chose silence. Whether that choice was made by priests guarding dangerous truths, rulers enforcing order, or inheritors overwhelmed by responsibility, no longer matters. What matters is the result. A civilization that once built in harmony with cosmic cycles left behind monuments that still measure time, space, and proportion with astonishing accuracy, while the explanation for how and why remains absent. The pyramids are not asking to be worshipped, they are asking to be understood. And until the logic behind them is recovered, whether through rediscovered texts, reconstructed knowledge, or new insight, the question, who stole the Book of Pyramid Secrets, will continue to haunt us. Not because we want mystery, but because we recognize absence. And absence, when it aligns so perfectly with silence, is rarely accidental. Absence has a strange gravity. It pulls the mind toward it again and again, especially when what is missing appears to have shaped everything that remains. By this point, the Book of Pyramid Secrets is no longer just a hypothetical manuscript. It has become a placeholder for a deeper loss, the loss of a coherent framework that once unified science, spirituality, and architecture into a single language. What makes this absence so unsettling is that the pyramids still behave as if that framework exists. They are not random, they are not approximate, they are not crude. Every measurement, every angle, every placement suggests intentionality beyond ceremony. The structure does not merely sit on the earth, it interacts with it. It responds to gravity, to vibration, to light, to celestial movement. It is positioned as if it were part of a system rather than a standalone object. Systems are built with instructions, and systems without instructions become myth. One of the clearest signs that something critical is missing is how modern explanations fracture under scrutiny. Each theory explains one feature while ignoring others. Ramps explain movement but not precision. Ritual explains symbolism but not geometry. Labor explains manpower but not alignment. No single model accounts for everything because no single model reflects the original design logic. This fragmentation mirrors what happens when a manual is removed from a machine. Operators guess, repairs become improvised. Eventually, the machine is repurposed or abandoned. That may be exactly what happened to the pyramids. Later, Egyptians continued to build pyramids, but the results were inferior. Precision declined, size decreased, complexity vanished. The shape remained, but the system was gone. That is not how mastery behaves. It is how inheritance without understanding behaves. Which suggests the builders of the Great Pyramid were not at the beginning of a learning curve. They were at the end of one. This raises a deeply uncomfortable possibility, that the knowledge behind the pyramids originated in a time or culture far removed from dynastic Egypt, a culture that either collapsed, departed, or withdrew, leaving behind instructions that were followed faithfully once, but never fully grasped again. If that is true, then the Book of Pyramid Secrets was not an Egyptian invention. It was an archive. Archives exist to preserve continuity. When continuity breaks, archives become dangerous. They preserve truths that no longer fit the world that inherits them. That is when archives disappear. Throughout history, the most dangerous books are not those that are false, but those that are true at the wrong time. They destabilize identity. They expose forgotten origins. They challenge the authority of the present by reminding it of a past it cannot reproduce. The Book of Pyramid Secrets, if it existed, would have done exactly that. It would have told future generations that humanity once knew more, not gradually, but suddenly. That civilization did not crawl forward blindly, but received knowledge in structured form. That our ancestors were not primitive experimenters, but executors of a design. That idea is far more threatening than ignorance. Ignorance can be taught. Inheritance cannot be undone. This may explain why the disappearance of Egyptian knowledge coincides so neatly with periods of ideological consolidation. When belief systems hardened, when empires standardized doctrine, when authority demanded singular narratives, that is when the past was rewritten. The pyramids survived because they were immovable. The book did not. And once the explanation was gone, the pyramids could be safely misunderstood. They could be framed as monuments to ego, as proof of suffering, as symbols of superstition, anything but what they actually were. Yet the structure itself refuses to cooperate with those interpretations. It continues to present data that does not belong to a primitive worldview. It continues to encode ratios that require advanced mathematics. It continues to point toward celestial phenomena with deliberate accuracy. It is not shouting its purpose, it is waiting. And waiting implies expectation. Perhaps the most haunting possibility is that the pyramids were never meant to be fully understood by every generation, that they were designed to outlast knowledge cycles, to remain dormant until humanity reached a level of awareness capable of reconstructing what was lost without direct instruction. In that sense, the Book of Pyramid Secrets may not have been stolen at all. It may have been intentionally withdrawn. Removed not to erase truth, but to delay it. Ancient cultures believed in cycles of rise and collapse. Knowledge was revealed, lost, and revealed again. Not everything was meant to persist continuously. Some truths were meant to return only when conditions aligned. If that belief guided the custodians of pyramid knowledge, then silence was not a failure. It was part of the design. The pyramids are not ruins of a forgotten experiment, they are markers placed at a specific moment in human development, carrying information forward in a language deeper than words. Stone does not decay like text. Geometry does not burn. Alignment does not forget. Perhaps the book was never the real repository. Perhaps the pyramids themselves were always the text, and the real question was never, who stole the Book of Pyramid Secrets? The real question is whether humanity is finally approaching the moment when it no longer needs it. If the pyramids themselves are the text, then what we are really confronting is not the loss of information, but the loss of literacy. A civilization once understood how to read the language of stone, proportion, and alignment. Later, civilizations inherited the letters, but forgot the grammar. They could see the symbols, but not the syntax that connected them into meaning. This is why modern investigation feels like circling a locked door. We measure, we scan, we model. And yet the full picture refuses to assemble. Every new discovery adds clarity to one corner while deepening confusion elsewhere. The pyramids behave as if they were designed to resist casual understanding, as if comprehension requires a specific mindset rather than more data. Ancient builders did not separate knowledge into compartments. To them, mathematics was not abstract, astronomy was not distant, and architecture was not inert. These were expressions of the same underlying order. The pyramid unified them because it was built as a convergence point, a place where earth, sky, time, and consciousness intersected. This kind of thinking is alien to modern systems. Today, we divide knowledge into disciplines. Engineers do not study cosmology. Architects rarely calculate stellar cycles. Physicists do not encode metaphysics into buildings. The pyramids violate these boundaries. They demand integration, which suggests that the missing book may have taught not just facts, but how to think. That kind of instruction is the hardest to preserve. Facts can be written down, procedures can be copied, but worldview, the lens through which reality is interpreted, must be lived. When the culture that sustains that worldview collapses, the instructions become meaningless. Later readers may have possessed the words of the Book of Pyramid Secrets and still failed to understand it. In that sense, the book could disappear even if it physically survived. This raises a disturbing possibility. The book may have been read and still lost. If later generations encountered knowledge they could not integrate, they may have dismissed it as symbolic, heretical, or incomprehensible. Over time, such texts are neglected, miscopied, or quietly removed from circulation. Not because they are feared, but because they no longer function. This kind of loss leaves no dramatic trace, no flames, no decree, just gradual erasure. And yet some ideas refuse to vanish completely. Sacred geometry persists. The golden ratio recurs. Stellar alignments echo in temples worldwide. These fragments behave like fossils, evidence of a once living system now reduced to isolated remnants. They are not random. They cluster around the same principles embodied by the pyramids. Which implies that the Book of Pyramid Secrets was not unique in content, but central in coherence. It connected fragments into a whole. Without it, knowledge splintered into traditions that no longer spoke to one another. This fragmentation had consequences. Once knowledge became siloed, it became easier to control. Specialized experts replaced holistic understanding. Authority replaced insight. Interpretation replaced experience. The pyramids were admired, but never interrogated deeply enough to threaten the new order. And that new order thrived on linear history. A past that steadily improves toward the present is reassuring. A past that contains lost peaks is destabilizing. The pyramids hint at a peak that does not fit the story, a moment of synthesis that came too early, too complete, and too inexplicable. The missing book would have explained that peak, which is precisely why it could not be allowed to persist. A civilization that believes it stands at the highest point of progress is easier to govern than one that suspects it has fallen. Memory of loss breeds unrest. Memory of inheritance breeds responsibility. If humanity once held knowledge capable of shaping stone to mirror the cosmos, then what else did it once understand? And why did it let that understanding go? These are not comfortable questions. They undermine confidence. They weaken authority. They dissolve the illusion of inevitability. So the narrative was simplified. Ancient people were primitive. Progress is linear. The pyramids were tombs. Once these ideas hardened into consensus, the missing book no longer needed to be hidden. It had already been rendered irrelevant by interpretation, but relevance is not permanence. As modern tools allow us to see what ancient builders saw, star movements, planetary cycles, mathematical harmonics, the old questions return with renewed force. We begin to glimpse the coherence that once existed, and with each glimpse, the silence grows louder. The pyramids do not need defenders. They do not need believers. They need readers, not readers of text, but readers of pattern. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets was a guide, its purpose may have been temporary. It may have existed only to bridge a moment in human development, to carry understanding across a transition that later generations were never meant to navigate directly. In that case, its disappearance was not theft. It was closure. And closure implies that the responsibility has shifted. The pyramids still stand unchanged, as if waiting for something to return. Not a book, not a priesthood, not a god, but a way of seeing. Because when that way of seeing returns, the secrets will not need to be written down again. They will be obvious. At some point, the mystery surrounding the pyramids stops being about the past and starts being about us, about how we decide what knowledge is acceptable, about what kinds of questions are allowed to survive, and about the quiet mechanisms through which civilizations forget not by accident, but by design. The idea that humanity once possessed a unified system of knowledge, one that integrated science, architecture, astronomy, and consciousness, is deeply uncomfortable. It challenges modern assumptions about progress. It suggests that intelligence does not always move forward. It implies that collapse can erase not just infrastructure, but understanding itself. This is why the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets feels deliberate even without physical proof. Because forgetting at this scale requires cooperation. Entire generations accepted explanations that do not fully explain. Entire academic traditions learned to stop asking certain questions. Entire cultures inherited monuments while losing curiosity about their function. This kind of forgetting does not happen spontaneously. It happens when questions become socially expensive. Once the pyramids were safely categorized as tombs, deeper inquiry threatened professional credibility. Researchers who asked uncomfortable questions were sidelined. Alternative interpretations were framed as pseudoscience regardless of evidence. Over time, intellectual boundaries hardened, not around truth, but around safety. And safety preserves narratives. The irony is that the pyramids themselves never conformed to those narratives. They remain anomalous by any standard. Their construction defies simple explanation. Their precision exceeds symbolic necessity. Their placement reflects knowledge that should not have been available at the time. And anomalies do not disappear simply because they are inconvenient. They wait. What makes the missing book so powerful as an idea is that it explains the pattern of absence. It accounts for why knowledge appears suddenly, fully formed, and then vanishes. It explains why later civilizations revered the pyramids but could not reproduce them. It explains why geometry became sacred rather than practical. It explains why Egypt was remembered as a land of wisdom long after its methods were gone. Without the book, all of this appears contradictory. With the book, it becomes coherent. The book represents a bridge between worlds, between epochs, between ways of knowing. Remove the bridge, and the landscape fragments. People on one side see ruins. People on the other see myth. Neither sees the system that once connected them. This fragmentation echoes through history. Alchemy preserved fragments of ancient science without its framework. Mysticism preserved symbols without mechanism. Architecture preserved form without function. Each tradition held a piece of something larger. But without synthesis, none could reconstruct it. And synthesis is dangerous. Synthesis creates leverage. Leverage creates transformation. Transformation threatens stability. That is why unified knowledge systems are the first to be broken during periods of upheaval. They give too much power to those who understand them. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets explained how to align matter with cosmic order, how to harness geometry, vibration, and resonance to interact with natural forces, then its loss was not simply historical, it was strategic. Such knowledge would undermine centralized control. It would reduce dependence on authority. It would reconnect humans with cycles beyond political time. History shows that ruling systems rarely tolerate that. Instead, they favor fragmentation, specialization, gatekeeping, knowledge divided into manageable domains, each overseen by institutions. What cannot be managed is either spiritualized or erased. Egyptian knowledge was spiritualized. Once labeled mystical, it could be admired without being applied. Once mythologized, it could be taught without threatening the present. The pyramids became wonders, not instructions. This transformation did not require conspiracy. It required alignment of incentives. Priests protected doctrine, empires protected order, scholars protected careers. Over centuries, silence became tradition. The Book of Pyramid Secrets did not need to be burned everywhere. It only needed to stop being copied. And copying is a choice. Texts survive because someone believes they matter. When belief fades, survival ends quietly. A manuscript neglected for a generation is lost forever. No flames required. This is likely how the book vanished. Not in a single dramatic act, but through a gradual withdrawal of attention, through decisions about what was worth preserving, through the slow replacement of functional understanding with symbolic reverence. Yet symbols have a strange persistence. Even stripped of explanation, the pyramids still transmit something. Visitors report altered perception. Scientists measure unexpected effects. Architects study their proportions instinctively. Artists reproduce their geometry unconsciously. This suggests that some forms of knowledge are not fully dependent on explanation. They are embodied, encoded, felt, which may have been the original intent. The book may have existed to teach one generation. The pyramids may have been designed to teach all others, not through words, but through encounter. Words are fragile. Stone is patient. If that is true, then the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets was not a failure of preservation, but a shift in method. Knowledge was no longer to be read. It was to be rediscovered, not inherited blindly, but earned. This interpretation changes the tone of the mystery entirely. Instead of asking who stole the book, we are forced to ask why it was allowed to disappear. Perhaps the custodians understood that written instruction could be misused. That power without wisdom leads to catastrophe, that some technologies must not outpace maturity. Ancient myths are filled with warnings about forbidden knowledge: fire stolen from gods, towers built to heaven, floods sent to reset the world. These stories may not be allegory alone, they may be memory. Memory of what happens when humanity accesses forces it does not yet understand. If the pyramids represent a controlled expression of such knowledge, aligned, stable, restrained, then the book explaining them may have been removed to prevent reckless imitation. The pyramids cannot be moved. They cannot be replicated easily. They cannot be weaponized. A book can. This may be the most unsettling conclusion of all, that the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets was not an act of ignorance or oppression, but an act of restraint, a decision made by those who believed that understanding must evolve before instruction can return. And if that is true, then the real mystery is not why the book vanished. It is why interest in the pyramids is resurging now, why modern technology is finally capable of detecting their hidden chambers, measuring their fields, decoding their ratios. Why global attention is turning back toward questions that were once considered settled. Perhaps the cycle is turning again. Perhaps humanity is approaching another threshold. And perhaps the pyramids were never meant to explain themselves until that moment arrived. Not through a book, but through recognition. At this stage, the mystery stops behaving like a historical puzzle and starts behaving like a mirror. The longer the Book of Pyramid Secrets remains absent, the more it reflects back a troubling question. Not what was lost, but why we struggle to imagine that it could have existed at all. Because the strongest barrier to rediscovering ancient knowledge is not lack of evidence, it is lack of conceptual permission. Modern civilization is built on a specific assumption that intelligence accumulates steadily over time, that the present is always more advanced than the past, and that ancient people were necessarily less capable because they lived earlier. This assumption is so deeply ingrained that it functions almost like instinct, and the pyramids violate it completely. They do not behave like the products of gradual experimentation. They behave like the execution of a complete system. No trial phase, no learning curve, no visible evolution from simple to complex. The Great Pyramid appears suddenly, fully optimized, mathematically precise, astronomically aligned, and materially extreme. Then the knowledge degrades. This reversal is not just anomalous, it is threatening. Because if complexity can appear suddenly and vanish just as suddenly, then progress is not guaranteed. Civilization becomes fragile, knowledge becomes mortal. And that idea is far more destabilizing than any theory about aliens or lost books. This is why the Book of Pyramid Secrets matters so much even in its absence. It represents the missing explanation that would force us to reconsider how knowledge moves through time. Was it discovered independently? Was it inherited? Was it taught? Was it remembered? Or was it deliberately constrained? The pyramids alone do not answer these questions, but the pattern of silence surrounding them does. When a civilization truly understands how it builds something, it teaches that knowledge openly. It trains successors. It leaves records. When it does not fully understand, it preserves results and ritualizes meaning. And when it fears the implications of understanding, it restricts access. Egypt shows signs of all three stages. Early dynastic Egypt displays reverence toward pyramid builders, not familiarity. Later, Egyptians do not speak of our engineering, they speak of the works of the ancestors. That shift matters. It signals a break in continuity. The pyramids were no longer projects, they were inheritances. And inheritances without explanation become sacred. Sacred things are not examined, they are protected. This is where the Book of Pyramid Secrets becomes not just a missing object, but a missing permission slip. Without it, inquiry is constrained, interpretation defaults to symbolism, function becomes metaphor, the knowledge becomes safe and sterile. Now consider this in the context of ancient global memory. Across multiple civilizations, there is a recurring theme of a lost age of wisdom, not a primitive age, but a golden age. An age when gods or teachers walked among humans. An age that ended abruptly due to catastrophe, hubris, or cosmic cycle. These stories are often dismissed as myth, but myths are not invented randomly. They persist because they encode something meaningful, especially when they appear independently across cultures that had no contact with one another. The Egyptian Zep Tepi, the Sumerian pre-flood era, the Hindu Satya Yuga, the Mesoamerican previous suns, all describe the same arc: advanced knowledge, sudden loss, diminished inheritance. The Book of Pyramid Secrets fits perfectly into this pattern. It would have been the textual remnant of a prior phase of understanding, a bridge across a discontinuity. And bridges are dangerous because they allow movement between worlds that are not supposed to touch. Once that bridge is gone, each era becomes isolated. The past becomes myth. The present becomes absolute. That isolation is politically useful. If people believe the past was primitive, they look forward for solutions. If they believe the past was superior, they look backward. And backward-looking societies are harder to control. This is not speculation. It is a pattern observable throughout history. Revolutionary knowledge is always framed as either impossible or irrelevant until power structures collapse, which brings us to a critical realization. The disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets may not have been an isolated event. It may have been part of a broader cultural immune response, a systemic rejection of knowledge that no longer fit the operating model of civilization. When Egypt transitioned from a cosmologically integrated society to one ruled by foreign empires and later religious absolutism, the pyramid worldview became incompatible. Knowledge that once unified sky, earth, and humanity now threatened new hierarchies, and so it was neutralized, not destroyed loudly, but drained of coherence. Fragments were allowed to survive: geometry, myth, symbolism, but the integrative logic was removed. Without integration, the knowledge could no longer function. This is how dangerous systems are disarmed. Now consider the modern moment. We live in a time of unprecedented specialization. Physics, biology, architecture, astronomy, psychology all exist in separate silos. Integration is rare. Holistic thinking is often dismissed as unscientific, and yet the pyramids demand exactly that kind of thinking. They refuse to be understood by one discipline alone. Engineers struggle without cosmology, astronomers struggle without architecture, physicists struggle without cultural context. The pyramids expose the limits of reductionism, which may be why they feel so unsettling now. As humanity faces ecological instability, technological overreach, and existential risk, questions about lost wisdom resurface. Not nostalgia, but necessity. We begin to wonder whether earlier civilizations understood balance in ways we do not. The pyramids embody balance. They are massive yet stable, precise yet durable, symbolic yet functional. They do not exploit their environment. They harmonize with it. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets explained how to achieve that harmony, how to align human construction with planetary and cosmic forces, then its disappearance may be one of the most consequential losses in human history. Not because it made us weaker, but because it made us forget what restraint looks like. Modern civilization excels at extraction, acceleration, and domination. Ancient civilizations, at their peaks, appear to have excelled at alignment. Those are not the same values. The pyramids stand at the crossroads of those values, built with immense effort, yet seemingly designed to endure without maintenance. They consume no energy. They pollute nothing. They perform no visible labor. They simply exist in relation to everything else. That is not ignorance. That is mastery. And mastery does not vanish unless something interrupts it. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may have been stolen. It may have been hidden. It may have been allowed to decay. But its disappearance tells us something more important than its contents ever could. It tells us that knowledge is not lost when civilizations collapse. It is lost when civilizations decide they no longer want to understand. And that decision is reversible. The pyramids have not changed. Only we have. Once the possibility is accepted that the Book of Pyramid Secrets did exist, even as a collection of integrated knowledge rather than a single bound volume, the question of who removed it becomes unavoidable. Knowledge at this scale does not simply dissolve. It is filtered, redirected, or suppressed by structures that benefit from its absence. History provides a limited list of candidates. The first were the late Egyptian priesthoods themselves. By the final centuries of dynastic Egypt, the civilization was already living in the shadow of its own past. Monumental construction had ceased. The language had evolved. The meaning of rituals had shifted. Priests no longer built pyramids, they guarded them. That transition is subtle, but crucial. Guardians do not always understand what they guard. As foreign powers encroached, Egyptian priests faced an impossible dilemma: preserve knowledge that no longer functioned within the world they inhabited, or protect cultural continuity by ritualizing what could no longer be practiced. In times of instability, survival often requires simplification. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may have been reduced internally first, stripped of operational meaning and preserved only as myth. Once that happened, the text would no longer be copied. It would no longer be taught. It would no longer be needed. That alone could explain its disappearance. But that is only the first layer. The second layer involves conquest. When Alexander entered Egypt, he did not destroy its culture. He absorbed it. Greek rulers adopted Egyptian symbolism while replacing its power structures. Knowledge became ornamental rather than functional. What mattered was legitimacy, not understanding. Under Roman rule, the situation worsened. Rome tolerated ancient wisdom only insofar as it reinforced imperial authority. Mystery cults were permitted selectively. Anything that suggested alternative sources of legitimacy or power was dangerous. Egyptian cosmology, with its emphasis on cosmic order rather than imperial hierarchy, did not fit Roman governance. Texts that could not be integrated were sidelined. By the time Christianity rose to dominance, the tolerance ended. Christian doctrine did not merely replace pagan belief, it redefined truth itself. Knowledge was no longer validated by alignment with nature or cosmos, but by conformity to Scripture. Anything suggesting pre-biblical wisdom or non-biblical teachers was automatically suspect. Egyptian knowledge was not debated, it was condemned. This is where suppression becomes explicit. Pagan temples were closed, priestly lineages were broken, ritual languages died, sacred texts were destroyed or confiscated. This was not accidental collateral damage. It was theological cleansing. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed at this point, it would have represented everything Christianity could not tolerate. Knowledge older than Scripture, power derived from alignment, not obedience, truth encoded in nature rather than revelation. Its removal would have been inevitable. But destruction leaves traces. And here is where the story becomes more unsettling. There are hints that not all Egyptian knowledge was destroyed. Some of it was absorbed quietly, filtered through translation, reinterpretation, and secrecy. Hermetic traditions, alchemy, sacred geometry, and later esoteric orders all claimed Egyptian inheritance. This suggests that the knowledge was not erased completely. It was redistributed. Operational knowledge disappeared. Symbolic knowledge survived. That distinction matters. Operational knowledge gives people power to act. Symbolic knowledge gives people stories to interpret. Power structures prefer the latter, which brings us to the most uncomfortable possibility of all. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may not have been stolen by enemies. It may have been preserved by insiders. Secret societies emerge precisely where knowledge becomes too disruptive to exist openly. Initiation replaces education, symbols replace explanations, geometry becomes ritual, architecture becomes allegory. The knowledge does not die, it becomes encrypted. If fragments of pyramid knowledge survived in this way, they would be deliberately incomplete. Enough to inspire awe, not enough to empower replication. That would explain why sacred geometry persists without context. Why proportions are revered without explanation, why alignment is admired without method. The book, in this sense, was dismantled, its chapters scattered across traditions that no longer speak to one another. Now, consider the timing. The suppression of Egyptian knowledge coincides with the rise of centralized doctrinal authority across Europe and the Near East. Knowledge becomes vertical rather than horizontal. Truth flows from institutions, not from observation of nature. That shift fundamentally changes how humanity interacts with reality. Under Egyptian cosmology, humans aligned themselves with cycles they did not control. Under later systems, humans sought dominance over land, over time, over belief. The pyramids embody the former world view. The missing book explains it. And that worldview was incompatible with what came next. This incompatibility explains why later civilizations could admire the pyramids endlessly without ever seriously asking what they were for. Asking that question too deeply risks destabilizing assumptions about human origin, authority, and destiny, which leads to the present. Modern science has begun rediscovering principles ancient builders may have understood intuitively: resonance, harmonics, field interaction, nonlinear systems. As this happens, the pyramids no longer appear irrational. They appear premature, built before humanity had language to explain what it was doing. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed, it may have served as a temporary scaffold, a way to transmit understanding during a narrow window of readiness. Once that window closed, the scaffold was removed, not stolen, not burned, but withdrawn. This interpretation reframes the entire mystery. The book was not lost because humanity failed. It was removed because humanity changed. And that raises a final unsettling thought. If the knowledge was removed once because humanity was not ready, what happens when humanity becomes ready again? The pyramids are still there. The alignments still hold. The ratios still encode meaning. Nothing has been erased, only delayed, which means the true theft may not have been of a book at all. It may have been of time. Time taken from human understanding until maturity caught up with capability. And if that is true, then the silence was not meant to last forever. It was meant to last until recognition returned. If time itself was the true thing taken, then the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets becomes something far more unsettling than theft or suppression. It becomes a pause, an imposed delay in humanity's relationship with a deeper layer of reality. And pauses like that are never neutral. They reshape cultures, redirect values, and redefine what people believe is possible. After the ancient world closed its doors on integrated knowledge, human civilization reorganized itself around fragmentation. Science separated from spirituality, architecture detached from astronomy. Mathematics became abstract rather than cosmological. Knowledge became something to be owned, categorized, and controlled rather than something to be aligned with. This reorganization produced enormous power, but it also produced imbalance. The pyramids stand as artifacts from before that split, before knowledge was divided into disciplines, before humanity saw itself as separate from nature rather than embedded within it. Their design suggests a worldview in which humans did not dominate forces but cooperated with them. Gravity was not fought, it was calculated. Time was not conquered, it was mirrored. Space was not exploited, it was harmonized. The Book of Pyramid Secrets would have explained how to live within that worldview. And that worldview is precisely what later civilizations moved away from. Empires require extraction, they require expansion, hierarchy, and linear growth. A civilization that aligns itself with cycles rather than domination does not conquer efficiently. It does not build endlessly. It does not centralize power easily. Knowledge that reinforces balance is dangerous to systems that thrive on excess. This may explain why the disappearance of Egyptian integrated knowledge coincides so closely with the rise of expansionist civilizations. Rome, medieval empires, colonial powers, all prioritized control over alignment. Their technologies amplified force rather than harmony. Their architecture asserted dominance rather than resonance. In that context, the pyramids became incomprehensible relics. They belonged to a way of thinking that no longer served the ambitions of the age. And ambition rewrites history. Once ambition became the guiding force of civilization, the narrative of the past had to change. Ancient societies were reframed as primitive. Their achievements were attributed to brute labor. Their cosmologies were dismissed as superstition. Their integration of disciplines was forgotten. This reframing justified conquest. It justified exploitation. It justified the belief that the present always knows better than the past. The Book of Pyramid Secrets, had it survived openly, would have contradicted that narrative. It would have said, once, humanity understood something you do not. Once, civilization built with restraint rather than excess. Once, progress meant alignment rather than accumulation. That is not a comfortable message for a world addicted to growth. So the silence persisted. But silence does not erase consequences. Without the framework that once balanced human ambition, civilization accelerated unchecked. Energy consumption exploded, ecological systems destabilized, technology advanced faster than ethics. Knowledge multiplied faster than wisdom. Ironically, the very separation of disciplines that made modern science powerful also made it blind. We became experts in parts, but novices in wholes. The pyramids, by contrast, are wholes. They integrate geology, astronomy, mathematics, acoustics, and symbolism into a single structure that functions across time. They do not require constant input. They do not decay rapidly. They do not demand expansion. They endure. Which brings us to a deeply uncomfortable realization. What if the Book of Pyramid Secrets was not meant to prevent human progress, but to prevent human self-destruction? What if the knowledge it contained required a level of maturity that later civilizations did not yet possess? A maturity that prioritizes equilibrium over power, responsibility over speed, understanding over domination. In that case, removing the book would not have been an act of fear. It would have been an act of containment. Ancient traditions repeatedly warn that advanced knowledge given too early leads to catastrophe. Flood myths, fire myths, skyfall myths, all describe resets triggered by imbalance. Whether interpreted literally or metaphorically, they carry the same lesson. Technology without alignment destroys its own foundation. The pyramids may have been built as reminders of that lesson, not instructions for conquest, but anchors of memory. If so, then the silence surrounding them is not meant to be permanent. It is meant to last until humanity reaches a stage where it can rediscover the knowledge without repeating the mistakes that once made its concealment necessary. That may be why modern interest in the pyramids is resurging now, not as mythology, but as engineering, physics, and systems science. Researchers are beginning to ask different questions, not what did they worship, but what did they understand? This shift matters because understanding does not require belief, it requires humility. Humility to accept that ancient people may have known things we do not. Humility to accept that progress is not guaranteed. Humility to accept that some wisdom is lost, not because it was wrong, but because it was inconvenient. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may never be found as a physical object. It may have been dismantled, hidden, or allowed to decay beyond recovery. But its absence has already done its work. It has forced us to confront the limits of our narratives. And narratives are the most powerful technologies of all. They determine what questions we ask. They determine what answers we accept. They determine what we believe is possible. For centuries, the dominant narrative said the pyramids were tombs built by brute force. That narrative closed inquiry. It made curiosity unnecessary. Now that narrative is cracking, and when narratives crack, buried questions surface. Questions about lost knowledge, questions about suppressed understanding, questions about whether humanity has walked this path before. The pyramids do not answer those questions directly. They do something more unsettling. They imply that answers exist, just beyond the reach of inherited explanation, which means the real legacy of the Book of Pyramid Secrets is not the information it contained, but the challenge it poses. A challenge to rediscover alignment rather than domination. A challenge to reunite disciplines rather than fragment them. A challenge to grow wiser, not just more powerful. If the book was removed to delay that challenge, then its purpose has nearly been fulfilled, because humanity is once again standing at a crossroads, and this time the pyramids are no longer silent relics. They are reminders. Reminders that civilization once chose balance, and reminders that it can choose it again. Standing at that crossroads, the question shifts again. It is no longer only about what was lost or who removed it. It becomes about whether loss itself can function as a message. In many ancient traditions, absence is not failure, it is instruction. Silence is not ignorance, it is restraint. And restraint, when practiced deliberately, signals that knowledge was never meant to be consumed the way modern societies consume information, endlessly, immediately, without consequence. The pyramids seem to embody this philosophy. They do not explain themselves. They do not instruct directly. They invite observation, patience, and synthesis. They reward those who approach them slowly, holistically, and without the assumption that answers must arrive quickly. That design choice matters. Modern knowledge systems prioritize speed. Discoveries are published rapidly. Technologies are deployed before their social impact is understood. Ethical frameworks lag behind capability. The result is acceleration without integration, power without coherence. The pyramids resist that model entirely. They have endured not because they were hidden, but because they were opaque. Their meaning cannot be extracted casually. Their logic cannot be reverse-engineered by a single discipline. They force collaboration between astronomy, geology, physics, architecture, and philosophy. They demand humility before analysis. This is the opposite of how modern societies usually engage with knowledge, which raises a disturbing possibility. Perhaps the Book of Pyramid Secrets was removed not only because of what it explained, but because of how it would have been used. Written knowledge invites copying, dissemination, and simplification. Once separated from context, it becomes dangerous. Instructions without worldview become weapons. Techniques without ethics become tools of domination. Stone, by contrast, cannot be misused easily. You cannot mass-produce pyramids. You cannot weaponize alignment. You cannot rush geometry embedded in bedrock. The knowledge encoded in the pyramids requires effort to access. It filters curiosity through patience. It rewards understanding over memorization. If the ancient custodians of this knowledge understood that future civilizations would prioritize speed over balance, then removing written instructions becomes an act of foresight rather than suppression. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may have been too efficient. Efficient knowledge spreads faster than wisdom. It allows replication without comprehension. It short-circuits the developmental process that aligns capability with responsibility. This is a lesson modern civilization is learning painfully in real time. Technologies now shape reality faster than culture can adapt. Artificial intelligence advances faster than ethics. Genetic engineering advances faster than consensus. Energy extraction advances faster than planetary stability. Knowledge has outpaced maturity. The pyramids stand as evidence of a different approach. They suggest that ancient builders understood a truth modern systems struggle with, that not all knowledge should be democratized immediately, and not all capability should be unlocked before its consequences are understood. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed, it may have been withdrawn precisely because humanity entered a phase where speed replaced wisdom. That interpretation reframes the entire mystery. The book was not stolen by enemies. It was not destroyed by ignorance. It was not hidden out of fear. It was retired. Retired because its function was complete. Retired because its continued presence would have caused more harm than good. Retired because the medium of transmission needed to change, from text to structure, from instruction to example, from explanation to experience. This would explain why no single culture after Egypt ever reproduced the pyramids exactly. Not because they lacked skill, but because they were not meant to. The pyramids were not a technology to be copied. They were a reference point, a reminder of what alignment looks like when achieved fully. They do not scale. They do not iterate. They do not improve. They simply remain. That permanence stands in stark contrast to modern innovation, which is defined by obsolescence. New replaces old. Speed replaces depth. Progress replaces continuity. The pyramids reject that logic. They suggest that some achievements are not meant to be surpassed, only understood. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets were rediscovered tomorrow, intact, translated, operational, the question would not be, what can we build? The question would be, should we? And that question has haunted every civilization that came after Egypt. Empires answered it with expansion. Modernity answered it with acceleration. Neither answer has produced equilibrium. The pyramids propose a third option, one that neither conquers nor consumes, but aligns. That option requires a level of collective maturity that may not have existed for most of human history. It may be emerging only now. This could explain the timing of renewed interest, not just in pyramids, but in systems thinking, sustainability, holistic science, and ancient wisdom traditions. These are not nostalgic trends. They are responses to imbalance. Humanity is rediscovering the limits of fragmentation. And when fragmentation fails, integration returns. The pyramids, stripped of mythology and denial, appear less like anomalies and more like signposts. They mark a moment when humanity briefly aligned knowledge, purpose, and restraint. A moment that ended, not because it was flawed, but because it was fragile. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may have documented that moment, but moments cannot be preserved forever. They can only be remembered. Stone remembers better than paper. Perhaps that was the lesson all along. The disappearance of the book was not meant to erase the past. It was meant to protect the future, to ensure that when humanity rediscovered alignment, it would do so through understanding rather than imitation. Not because it was told what to think, but because it learned how to see. And if that is true, then the most important part of the mystery is not behind us. It is ahead, because the pyramids are not relics waiting to be decoded. They are thresholds, and humanity is approaching them again, not as builders, not as worshippers, but as a species finally capable of asking the right questions. Questions not about power, not about conquest, but about balance. And balance, once lost, is the hardest secret of all to reclaim. If the pyramids are thresholds, then crossing them does not mean uncovering a hidden chamber or recovering a missing manuscript. It means reaching a state of understanding where the absence of the Book of Pyramid Secrets no longer feels like a loss, but like an invitation to reconstruct meaning rather than consume instruction. This idea runs counter to almost everything modern civilization values. We want answers immediately. We want documentation. We want certainty. But the pyramids refuse all three. They offer no instructions, only constraints, no explanations, only relationships. They do not tell us what they are. They show us how things relate, earth to sky, mass to geometry, time to proportion. They teach by demonstration, not description. That may be why the book was never meant to endure. A written explanation locks meaning into language. Language decays, words drift, context dissolves. What begins as clarity becomes confusion, but relationships, mathematical, astronomical, structural, remain stable across cultures and eras. They can be rediscovered independently, provided the observer is capable of seeing them. The pyramids are built to be rediscovered. This perspective casts the disappearance of the Book of Pyramid Secrets in a radically different light. Instead of theft, it becomes filtration. Instead of suppression, it becomes pacing. Knowledge was not removed entirely. It was slowed down to match human development. Ancient cultures believed that time itself was cyclical. Knowledge rose and fell with those cycles. Nothing was permanent. Nothing was final. Wisdom was revealed when alignment returned, not when demand was loudest. The pyramids embody this belief. They are not optimized for speed of understanding. They are optimized for longevity of meaning. That longevity has worked. Thousands of years passed, civilizations rose and collapsed. Languages died, religions replaced one another, empires carved the world apart, and still the pyramids remained intact, not because they were protected, but because they were never fully understood. Ignorance became their shield. That may sound paradoxical, but it mirrors a deeper truth. Some things survive precisely because they are not exploited. The pyramids were too massive to be repurposed easily, too complex to be copied casually, too ambiguous to weaponize. Their very mystery preserved them. A book, by contrast, invites use. Use leads to replication. Replication leads to distortion. Distortion leads to misuse. If the knowledge behind the pyramids involved forces or principles that required restraint, resonance, harmonics, planetary interaction, consciousness itself, then written instruction could have accelerated experimentation beyond control. Stone slows everything down, which brings us to the modern moment again. Today, humanity finally possesses the tools to measure what the pyramids encode. Satellite mapping reveals global alignment. Particle physics uncovers resonance and field behavior. Systems theory reconnects fragmented disciplines. Consciousness studies revisit questions ancient cultures never separated from science. For the first time, we are approaching the pyramids not as worshippers or conquerors, but as analysts capable of synthesis. This is not accidental. Civilizations tend to rediscover ancient questions when they face limits. Climate instability, technological overreach, and existential risk force reconsideration of values. Growth without balance becomes unsustainable. Speed without wisdom becomes dangerous. At that point, ancient examples stop looking primitive and start looking instructive. The pyramids suggest that civilization once prioritized endurance over expansion, stability over dominance, alignment over exploitation. These are not romantic ideals, they are engineering choices. The Book of Pyramid Secrets, had it survived, might have explained those choices explicitly. Its absence forces us to infer them instead. Inference is slower, but it is safer, because inference requires internalization. It forces humanity to rebuild understanding from first principles rather than copying solutions. It ensures that rediscovery happens only when the necessary conceptual maturity exists. This reframes the entire mystery one last time. The book was not stolen by invaders, it was not erased by ignorance, it was not hidden by fear, it was outgrown. Or rather, humanity grew away from the conditions under which it was useful. Now, millennia later, humanity may be growing back toward them, not because the past was better, but because balance has become necessary again. The pyramids do not demand belief. They do not demand reverence. They do not demand imitation. They demand coherence. They ask whether humanity can integrate what it knows into a stable whole, whether it can align capability with responsibility, whether it can build systems that endure rather than consume. Those questions are not ancient. They are urgently modern. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets ever existed, its true content may never have been diagrams or formulas. It may have been a philosophy of restraint encoded through architecture rather than language. And philosophy survives best when it is lived, not read. This would mean the greatest misconception about the book is the belief that finding it would solve the mystery. It would not. It would only remove the delay. The delay is the lesson. The pyramids have waited thousands of years for humanity to ask different questions. Not, how did they do this? But why did they choose to do it this way? When that question becomes central, the need for a book disappears, because the knowledge was never truly lost. It was embedded, waiting for a species mature enough to read it without destroying what it reveals. That maturity is not guaranteed, but for the first time in history, it may be possible. And that is why the mystery of the Book of Pyramid Secrets still matters, not as a historical curiosity, but as a test. Every civilization is tested not by what it can build, but by what it chooses to understand. And this is where the story of the Book of Pyramid Secrets reaches its most unsettling realization. The mystery was never designed to end with discovery. It was designed to end with judgment, not of the past, but of us. For thousands of years, humanity stood before the pyramids asking the wrong question. We asked how heavy the stones were, how many workers were used, how long construction took. We reduced wonder into logistics, brilliance into labor, intention into superstition. Those questions were safe. They did not threaten worldview. They did not challenge trajectory. The question that was avoided was always the same. What kind of civilization builds something like this? Not what tools they had, not how many people died, but what values guided their choices. Because the pyramids are not optimized for speed. They are not optimized for profit. They are not optimized for expansion, they are optimized for permanence. That alone places them outside nearly every civilization that followed. Modern society builds to grow. Ancient Egypt, at its peak, built to endure. Those are fundamentally different philosophies. One consumes the future, the other attempts to stabilize it. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets existed, it would have explained this philosophy explicitly. A framework for aligning human ambition with planetary and cosmic limits. Such a framework would have been incompatible with the eras that followed. Empires could not operate under it. Industrial civilization could not accelerate under it. Modern economic systems could not survive it, which means its disappearance was not random, it was inconvenient. The true theft, then, was not of a book, it was of orientation. Humanity lost its reference point for restraint. Progress became linear, aggressive, and extractive. Knowledge became something to accumulate rather than something to harmonize. The pyramids stood silently as that shift unfolded. They watched civilizations rise that could never replicate them, not because they lacked ability, but because they lacked intention. They watched humanity conquer space without understanding balance. They watched science advance while wisdom lagged behind. And still, they waited. Now, for the first time, humanity is approaching the limits of its own acceleration. Climate systems strain. Technological power outpaces ethical control. Fragmentation creates instability rather than resilience. The same questions ancient builders seem to confront are returning, not as philosophy, but as necessity. How do we build something that lasts? How do we align growth with survival? How do we prevent knowledge from destroying its own foundation? The pyramids do not answer these questions with words. They answer with example. They demonstrate that a civilization once chose alignment over domination, integration over fragmentation, endurance over speed. Whether that civilization inherited its knowledge, discovered it, or was taught it no longer matters. What matters is that the choice was made, and that choice left a mark so deep that it cannot be erased. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may never be found. It may never have existed as a single object. It may have been scattered, encrypted, or deliberately allowed to dissolve. But its disappearance is itself the final instruction. It tells us that not all knowledge is meant to survive unchanged, that not all power should be inherited blindly, that wisdom sometimes arrives only after loss. The pyramids remain not as answers, but as thresholds. They challenge humanity to evolve not technologically, but philosophically, to reunite what it has separated, to slow where it has rushed, to integrate where it has fragmented. If humanity fails that test, no book would have saved it, and if humanity passes it, no book will be needed. Because the ultimate secret of the pyramids was never about construction, it was about consciousness, about how a species understands its place in the universe, not as ruler, not as victim, but as participant. The pyramids do not demand belief, they demand maturity. And perhaps that is why the Book of Pyramid Secrets vanished when it did. Not because it was stolen, but because it had already said everything it needed to say. The rest was up to us. If the story ended with a stolen book, it would be simple: a villain, a crime, a loss. But the longer this mystery unfolds, the clearer it becomes that simplicity was never part of the design. The Book of Pyramid Secrets, whether it existed as a single manuscript, a collection of texts, or a living body of knowledge, did not disappear in the way ordinary things disappear. It faded in alignment with a deeper shift in human civilization, and that distinction matters. Because nothing truly essential was erased. The pyramids still stand exactly where they were placed, aligned with stars that continue to move, anchored to a planet that continues to turn. Their proportions remain intact. Their geometry remains precise. Their relationships remain readable to anyone willing to look beyond inherited explanations. They are not ruins of ignorance. They are monuments to restraint. Civilizations that followed Egypt mastered speed, conquest, and extraction. They learned how to dominate landscapes, reshape continents, and compress time. But in doing so, they lost something quieter and harder to measure: the ability to align ambition with consequence. The pyramids do not reflect ambition alone. They reflect limits. They were built as if the builders understood that civilization must eventually confront its own excess. That power without coherence leads to collapse. That knowledge without integration becomes destructive. That progress without balance consumes the very ground it stands on. This is why the pyramids feel out of place in history. They do not belong to a story of endless growth. They belong to a story of equilibrium. And equilibrium does not scale easily. If the Book of Pyramid Secrets explained how to achieve that balance, not through domination of nature, but through participation within it, then its disappearance was not an accident of time. It was an acknowledgement of fragility, a recognition that such understanding cannot survive in a world unwilling to live by it. The book did not vanish because it was weak. It vanished because it was too demanding. It demanded patience in a world accelerating. It demanded humility in a world seeking control. It demanded synthesis in a world fragmenting knowledge into power. So the explanation was withdrawn, not to punish humanity, not to deceive it, but to delay it. Delay until curiosity matured into responsibility. Delay until capability aligned with restraint. Delay until understanding could return without repeating the mistakes that once made concealment necessary. The pyramids remained because they could not be rushed. They could not be exploited. They could not be replicated without comprehension. They became silent teachers, offering example instead of instruction. And silence, when sustained for millennia, becomes a test of whether humanity will continue to ask only how things are built, or whether it will finally ask why they were built that way. The real theft, then, was not of a book. It was of orientation. Humanity lost its reference point for balance and replaced it with momentum. For thousands of years, that momentum carried civilization forward. But momentum without direction eventually leads to collision. Now, at the edge of ecological limits, technological overreach, and existential uncertainty, the old questions return, not as myth, but as necessity. How do we build something that lasts? How do we grow without destroying our foundation? How do we align knowledge with wisdom? The pyramids do not answer these questions directly. They do something more challenging. They demonstrate that it has been done before. And that knowledge alone was never the solution. The Book of Pyramid Secrets may never reappear in physical form. It may exist only as fragments, echoes, and encoded relationships, but its disappearance left behind the most powerful instruction of all: that wisdom cannot be handed down faster than maturity can rise to meet it. And so the mystery resolves not with discovery, but with responsibility. The pyramids are not waiting for us to uncover a lost manuscript. They are waiting for us to become the kind of civilization that no longer needs one. When that happens, if it happens, the secrets will not emerge from stone or scroll. They will emerge from recognition. And at that moment the question, who stole the Book of Pyramid Secrets, will finally fall away, because we will understand the truth. Nothing was taken from humanity. Humanity was given time.